Out of all the crazy things that happened in Season 4, the most important was actually something we've yet to talk about. It wasn't the invasion, the fights, or the subjugation of numerous races, but instead a simple conversation between two leaders vying for their people. An intimate moment between a prince and a king in which a rare unspoken friendship was birthed between them. I'm not talking about that fake type of friendship Ainz thinks he has with Jerkniv, but instead a real one where Ainz could drop the act and speak freely for once. It was a momentary break from his usual facade that resulted in what I believe is one of the most important scenes from Overlord. So, while we cover this last bit of cut content from Season 4, we'll come to learn exactly what it is Ainz has been fighting for. Before we get started though, today's video is sponsored by Naraka Bladepoint, a fast-paced melee-focused battle royale that's honestly quite refreshing since it's not just a shooting one. With a unique focus on weapons and skills revolving around close quarters combat, Naraka provides a new type of versatile gameplay that reinvigorates the entire genre. Not only is there a wide selection of weapons with their own dynamic set of moves, but the game's built-in counter system means no one weapon is inherently better than the others. It all comes down to how skilled you are at using it. So, with a high skill ceiling and numerous different styles and combos to try, Naraka's combat really is quite fun to get into. It's a game I highly recommend trying, especially now since it's free on Steam and Epic Games until the 22nd. Then, if you happen to enjoy it, you can always buy it after for 50% off until January 5th, or just get it for free with Xbox Game Pass. There's even a special in-game lotto where anyone who plays from now until the 25th will be entered into a lottery to win prizes like an Xbox or RTX 3090. You just gotta complete a couple in-game quests first. Plus, with the new hero Faria Shen coming out on the 22nd, now really is a pretty good time to get into the game. So, if you want to give Naraka Bladepoint a chance yourself, then feel free to download it now using the link in the description. But now, let's get back to the video. With Ainz's armies only 3 days away from the capital, Zanac had set off with everyone he could to intercept them. The last army in the entire kingdom, consisting mostly of conscripts from neighboring domains, capital citizens, and able-bodied refugees. It was a force that totaled to about 400,000. People who had taken up arms to protect their loved ones from the cruelties of the Sorcerer Kingdom. So, it was after a half-day's march to the nearby plains that the remaining time was spent building basic defenses for the imminent battle. You see, because Ainz's forces were walking a direct path to the capital, it was easy to know where exactly to set up so that they could intercept them. Of course, any other enemy would have just gone around them, but considering the nature of the army that he was dealing with, Zanac believed it unlikely for Ainz's forces to divert from the straight path ahead of them, likely as a testament to their dominance and confidence. If there was a strategically optimal play though, then the best thing Ainz could do was literally nothing. You see, with an army of undead not needing supplies to sustain themselves, Ainz could simply surround Zanac and wait for his supplies to run out. That, or at least wait for the panic to set in. When you consider just how many supplies are required to feed 400,000 people, it wouldn't take long for whatever stockpile Zanac has to run out, especially when they're already limited to begin with. But even so, Ainz's forces still marched forward without the slightest hesitation. Perhaps because Ainz could easily kill them with a recast of his previous spell, or perhaps because they simply knew that they were stronger. Either way, the one thing Zanac truly hoped to avoid was a repeat of last time. They easily could have split up their forces to make it harder for Ainz to do that, but with the previous loss of so many high-ranking officers, the number of people capable of commanding large forces just wasn't available. It wasn't something Zanac could afford to do right now. If he did split everyone up into smaller regiments, then that would only render them uncontrollable. No longer would they be able to stand their ground, and his final defensive line would just collapse into a crowd of 400,000 people. At least by standing together, there was a sense of cohesion that granted courage and unity. That was the core thing driving them to stand up against this impossible enemy. Now, it was 2 days after Zanac's arrival that Ainz's army would finally get there too. A small force consisting only of 10,000, in which a large majority could be split between 3 to 4 main types of undead. Seeing as how they didn't just walk straight through them though, Zanac knew he could use this momentary halt to commence a meeting. Not because he wished to have a battle of wits, but instead because he wanted answers. He simply wished to know why Ainz was doing this. For what reason could Ainz possibly have to be so vindictive here? Now, going alone was definitely a risk, but if Ainz had truly wanted to kill them, then he wouldn't have stopped his armies in the first place. Plus, it was a great way to highlight his gallantry. So, when Ainz received word of a royal envoy wishing to speak with him, he returned the favor and went alone as well. It certainly wasn't the safest move to make, but out of respect for the prince and the other potential eyes watching, Ainz knew that this was best. Of course, should something go wrong and he become mind-controlled, then Ainz had come up with a contingency plan to save himself, or at least contain himself. He had ordered Aura to use depiction of nature and society and have him sucked into a separate reality so he couldn't teleport out of it. That way he could stay there until something could be done to undo the brainwashing effects. The reason such drastic measures were needed was because, for some reason, Ainz decided to leave his personal world items back in Nazarick, thus rendering him vulnerable to the effects of other world items. Fortunately for him though, such precautions weren't necessary since Zanac just wanted to talk. It was actually quite the relief for Ainz, since a battle of wits was something that he wasn't confident in. In fact, when it came to everything aside from military might, Ainz was positive Zanac would be superior to him in it. He was, after all, true royalty. That being the case, despite Ainz not knowing what awaited him from this conversation, he was ready to return gestures of respect or dole out insults. It really all depended on what Zanac did. So, after conjuring 2 chairs and a table to converse at, Zanac led the conversation with his first question of why. A question that followed with the same response we got in the anime. The kingdom was simply a scapegoat intended to send a message. The core problem with a response like that though was that, at best this was nothing more than a surface level explanation. It was the reasoning Ainz would give when talking to a diplomat or his subordinates, not the true heartfelt answer that he was really thinking. Where more of that truth does start to come out though is after Zanac follows up with another why, this time wondering why Ainz was being so extreme about it. Like, if Ainz really wanted to send the message of not to defy him, then there were definitely other less hostile ways to do so. But because he had chosen this one, Zanac couldn't help but ask why he was being so vindictive. In the anime he had used the word close-minded, but I believe vindictive serves better to highlight exactly how Zanac thinks of him right now. He currently just sees Ainz as this vengeful leader killing everyone out of spite. So, being dissatisfied with Ainz's previous answer, Zanac once again asks for what it is that he's really after. And it's this additional pressing of the same question from before that leads Ainz deep into thought over exactly that. It's an important contemplative moment that does well to summarize everything Overlord's been about so far. So, in this culminative moment of self-reflection, Ainz recalled a past in which his friends from Yggdrasil were everything to him. Glorious memories from a life now gone that Ainz truly wished that he could see once more. That may have been why he invited everyone to log back in on the day the servers were closing, but the end he believed that to be was actually just the beginning. The NPCs his friends made had come to life, and with each of their actions he could sense the spirit of the companions who made them. Initially he feared they might betray him, but looking back now that was nothing more than a foolish thought stemming from how absurd everything was. In a time when nothing really made sense, it was only natural Ainz take every precaution needed to ensure his safety. Once that fear began to fade though, Ainz's main concern quickly shifted to that of other players. You see, after seeing the amount of signs that indicated their presence, it was extremely likely other players were in the new world as well. Or at least that's what Ainz was hoping was the case. When the small hints of their influence began to grow into bigger ones, there was a small glimmer of hope that began to spur in him. Perhaps his dear friends may have been transported alongside him. Perhaps the people with whom he shared these precious memories were also here. Of course, if being present at the same time the servers ended was a requirement, then the odds his friends were here weren't so likely anymore. It was a thought that led to a feeling of loneliness that intensified every time he'd use his spells or gather information. Like, the more he found out about his new environment, the more he yearned for his friends to be here to experience it with him. But as time went on without much else than these small signs of Yggdrasil, the dream of finding his friends slowly began to fade. He did still carry hope that one day he would find them, but that would always be present so long as he didn't know they were gone for sure. It was a testament to just how special they were to him. A hope that some may consider foolish or pathetic, but nonetheless one that represented everything that was once important to him. So, as fate would now have it, this hope of making more memories with the friends of his past was now slowly being replaced by a strong commitment to protect their creations. These NPCs that he once saw as strangers were now akin to the children of those most important to him. That being the case, as the last one left from the guild who birthed them, Ainz saw it as his personal duty to keep them safe. And that was a goal in which he would stake everything on. If sacrificing everything else was the cost of ensuring their safety, then Ainz had no problem letting the rest of the world suffer for it. So long as the NPCs weren't in danger, then literally everyone else didn't matter. Ainz refused to allow a single soul from Zanac to be lost, especially after what had happened with the Shaltir incident. When Shaltir was mind-controlled and turned against him, that's when Ainz knew that he needed to make Zanac stronger. He needed to ensure nothing like that would ever happen again. So it was after thinking about all that and more that Ainz would finally answer Zanac with happiness. You see, when he boiled down his motives to the most basic of reasons, the one that made the most sense to him was happiness. That was, after all, the ultimate goal for all creatures. What made this moment so particularly special, though, was the brief respite Ainz had taken from his usual act. He was no longer talking to Zanac like the ruler of a nation, but instead speaking to him as he would a friend. It was a rare moment in which Ainz had spoken freely for once. This, combined with the surprising response Ainz had given, were the core things leading Zanac to his conclusion after. So, when the meeting was done and the two had parted, Zanac felt Ainz to be shockingly human. Sure, his body was skeletal and his aura demonic, but the motivation Ainz had given was one that anyone could relate to. I mean, it was rather human to strive for the happiness of those you cared for. And it's for that reason that Zanac felt Ainz to be just like any other human. So, with that intimate moment wrapping up things between Zanac and Ainz, his return to camp was met with little strategic talk on what could be done next. An assembly that didn't last long since it was quickly interrupted by some feudal lords and their mercenaries. Now, Zanac did expect a rebellion to happen at some point, but he never expected it to happen here. It was an oversight on his part that only left himself to blame. You see, because he couldn't sense where the hearts of his nobles lay, the only thing that meant was that he failed as the king to instill courage and unify them. It was a clear indicator that he wasn't the same eminent figure that his father was, a person of reputation that the people could rally behind. But even so, Zanac committed to following through with the royal position that he made for himself. It may not have been something that he was cut out for in the end, but as a person that lacked any of the traits that his family had, he still did everything he could to make his country better. So, despite not even wanting to be king in the first place, Zanac made the most of what he had and still tried his best to fight for his people. In the end, he was fighting for the exact same thing Ainz was. Now, I'm sure plenty of you were looking forward to the extra information about the fate of those feudal lords, but aside from their families being sent to Nuranist as well, the rest was exactly as we saw. I would even go so far as to say better. The way the OST sets the tone along with Ainz's dismissive nature were all things that highlighted just how perturbed he was, and that was actually pretty awesome to see animated. But yeah, that's what I think was the most important scene in Overlord so far. Now, before I go, I did release a new Overlord video last week, so if you haven't gotten the chance to check it out yet, then you can do so now with the link in the description. You can also find the Armory desk mats there as well. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!